Jayme, it is so wonderful to see you again in Washington. And I do see sitting beside you, my very good, close personal friend outside of work, is Josh Wingrove of Bloomberg News, who he and I worked together in Ottawa. We were correspondents for competing news organizations, but, you know, we're friends. So, Josh, thanks for doing a favor and coming on the pod.
You're allowed to be friends with the competition. You know, you can just put down swords at 5 o'clock and enjoy
exactly,
each other's
and then
company.
have a cocktail.
That's right. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
This is a really big treat for me, too, because this is actually the first time that I've met Josh in person, but I've been a long-time admirer
Likewise.
of your work.
And it took taking you to Washington to make that happen.
Yeah.
So here we are. I hope you're not melting in the heat down here.
I am melting.
Yeah, good.
I am melting. Yeah.
Yeah. The swamp is still not drained,
No.
as it turns out.
But,
it's still pretty swampy here, and the summers are punishing, but it is what it is.
So this week I am avoiding the punishing weather. I'm up in Ottawa. I'm guest hosting Power and Politics for another week. And that's why I'm not in studio with you two lovely folks. And this week we're going to have a conversation about the Democrats. We've been getting a lot of inquiries from Canadians about sort of the state of play heading into the midterms, what the party is doing and the direction of the party going forward. But first, I know that Canadians are pretty anxious and really keen to learn any details they can about what's going on with Donald Trump's latest tariff threat, as we are about a week away from the latest deadline. When this airs on Wednesday, it'll be 1 week until new tariff day.
Our colleague, Kate McKenna, is, I think, right now outside in the heat, the Canadian embassy, waiting to see any news because there are talks with Dominic LeBlanc and trade rep Jameson Greer, which I know we're going to get to in a little bit, and so we're on top of it. We're on top of it.
Yes, so for Canadians who want to hear the latest that we have, that'll be coming up in just a moment. But like I mentioned, we want to spend most of this episode having a conversation about what is going on with the many Democratic primaries happening over the past few months, primaries with results like this.
We took on a machine. You're not supposed to be able to beat $70 million of outside spending. A record amount of money spent in a campaign against a Democrat in a primary in any campaign. You're not supposed to be able to beat that. And what we showed is that the power of our many is greater than the power of their money.
That is Abdul El-Sayed, who recently won the Michigan Democratic primary to run for a Senate seat this fall, a coveted open Senate seat with no incumbent in a swing state. These don't come up very often. And he did it with a much smaller budget and a much more progressive left-of-center platform than his primary opponents. And that's becoming a bit of a pattern lately in the Democratic Party at large.
Mm-hmm. But while these wins are being celebrated by progressive voters, many political watchers are not so convinced that they will lead to victory in this fall's midterm elections.
And so this week we are asking, what does the primary in Michigan say about the direction of the Democratic Party and about who might become the presidential candidate in 2028?
I'm Jayme Poisson.
I'm Josh Wingrove.
And I'm Katie Simpson, and we're Washington correspondents 2 blocks and then some from the White House. Okay, so we are going to start really quickly with tariffs just to give Canadians a bit of an update about what we know what's going on right now. As I mentioned, we're recording this around noon on Tuesday, so things could absolutely change between now and the time this is released Wednesday morning. Jayme, you mentioned our colleagues. They're trying to track down Dominic LeBlanc, who is the minister who is leading sort of the Canadian effort in this front. I understand he's in Washington. He just arrived this morning. What do we know?
So he's in this. He got in this morning, and he's supposed to be meeting with trade rep Jameson Greer today around 1:30. This is the third meeting between the two in the last 3 weeks, so you can read into that what you will. The August 19th deadline looms for those 50% tariffs that Trump slapped on a whole bunch of Canadian goods, cement, hockey sticks, some dairy, some antiques. And so that's where we are right now. I think we're all talking around noon on Tuesday.
And so, Josh, walk us through your framing. I know that this is something that you have covered given your time in Ottawa and your time in Washington. Can you give us sort of the framing of where things stand right now?
Yeah, I think the big question, Katie, is are these tariffs leverage, or does Trump actually intend to impose them? 338 tariffs have never been imposed before, so they're a bit of a test case at minimum. But we've seen more talking in the last week or two than we have previously, and so it seems like things are moving in a direction. We just don't really know what that is. I think it's important to level set here. Look, I'm Canadian. I live in the States. My friends and family back home, I'm well aware of the mood. We were just back over the summertime several times. But Trump has put tariffs on everyone. I think that's sometimes lost globally. For instance, Canada has the lowest effective tariff rate of any country in the G7. It's got one of the lowest in the G20. Only the Russians are lower, and Russia that's because that's a different kettle of fish with all kinds of other sanctions. And so that is sort of the base that things are starting at. That USMCA exemption remains in place. Of course, Trump could adjust that, but I think that is important to note that a lot of trade currently going between the countries is going tariff-free. A lot of countries aren't getting the benefit of that, or at least major economies are not. And so that's a starting point. And so I think that brings us to this week and the question of, what is Mark Carney willing to give up, and to a different extent, what are the premiers willing to agree to get maybe half a loaf from Donald Trump, right? We, for instance, do not know if USMCA renewal is on the table, or if Trump just wants to keep it in rolling renegotiation for a decade. And so there's a lot of moving parts on this one, but they are talking. We're going to see where it goes. Trump loves these sort of, hairpin, under a knife pressure points for negotiations. But I think there's a lot of options in front of us, including, delays, half deals, fuller deals. It's just kind of too soon to say where we'll go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we will leave that part of the conversation there, though, Josh. I'm sure we could do a whole special episode where we just chat about, what you've learned and your team's learned, and lean on your knowledge. But we're gonna pause it there for now. We will talk plenty about tariffs in the days and weeks to come. But we want to focus a little bit on something that Canadians have been emailing us and trying to get a better understanding of what's happening right now with the Democratic Party, especially with all of these primaries that are taking place. Josh, Michigan is a really great place to start. And for Canadians who might have heard the name but not really understand why this race was so important, bring us up to speed on who Abdul El-Sayed is and why his win is considered such a big deal.
Yeah, Michigan is a huge bellwether state. It is, of course, a swing state, but also a bellwether economically, demographically, and that's why people pay so much attention to it. The current senator, a Democrat, Gary Peters, is retiring. So this is open, and it is probably the biggest pickup opportunity for Republicans in this cycle when, of course, things aren't looking great, and Trump's poll numbers are in the absolute toilet right now. And so what the hope for Republicans is they can basically snag this away. The Democrats had a big primary that boiled down to 3 and then 2 candidates. And what we saw play out in Michigan has been playing out in other races where there was essentially one progressive candidate, Abdul El-Sayed, who won the race, and one or more moderate/establishment type candidates. And, in different states that takes different form, but that's how it shook out in Michigan. And Sayed overcame a lot of spending, in particular, to beat Haley Stevens. The question now is, that works in a primary of Democratic electorate voters. Does it work in a general election against a, pretty strong candidate as Republicans are concerned? He's run for Senate before. He's sort of a known quantity. He's both Trump-aligned, but not overly Trumpy in a way. So it's a pretty strong contest shaping up. And if you look at the splits, Sayed did not great in Detroit, where a lot of Democratic votes are. He did not great among black voters in particular, who are, of course, a foundation of the Democratic Party. And so the question in Michigan and in all these other races is all the juice that is making progressives do well in certain primaries, does that translate to a general election? And if it does the math still work the same for them to win?
Right. And Jayme, Josh, in that answer there, he mentioned Haley Stevens. That is who Abdul El-Sayed was running against, the more moderate establishment-backed candidate. Let's talk a little bit about, where, how her campaign was run. And again, it sort of speaks to why this win for El-Sayed was such a big deal.
Yeah. I thought this race was so interesting, in part because there was an eye-watering amount of money dumped into it. $60 million spent largely by super PACs on behalf of Haley Stevens. Half of that money was spent by AIPAC that we know about right now, which is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, which is this long-standing pro-Israel group, pro-Israel lobby, and it spent more than $30 million trying to defeat El-Sayed. Interestingly, they ran all these ads that didn't talk about Israel at all, right? They talked about Haley Stevens's record in auto manufacturing. They talked about how Barack Obama was fond of her in 2018. And as such, because of this, because of all of this spending, Israel and AIPAC became this incredibly central issue in the campaign. Stevens is quite supportive of Israel. El-Sayed, very critical of Israel. One of his key messages was that the U.S. shouldn't be sending bombs to the Middle East to, as he said, drop bombs on hospitals or schools, and instead should be spending it on healthcare. So he was really kind of linking that to affordability issues. And anyways, the progressives are really framing this win by El-Sayed as a guy that went up against big money, that went up against AIPAC and came out the other side. But of course, now, as Josh pointed out, he has to run against Mike Rogers, and AIPAC has signaled that they're going to probably spend quite a bit of money here.
Yeah, and I should note, El-Sayed frames his argument a lot of times in, we shouldn't be involved in foreign wars abroad. And there is kind of a bipartisan consensus. Who agreed on that was J.D. Vance until Iran happened, and here we are. But he's also campaigned with Hassan Piker, for example, which is inviting attacks from Republicans, because Piker has been much more vocal on Israel and Gaza. So it is brewing as an issue, and will be both in the state race and nationally for the Democrats and Republicans.
Well, it's going to be a nasty race, but we've already seen some of these primaries, the intra-party fighting. Josh, some have described it as messy.
It is messy. So in Michigan, basically every Democrat supported Haley Stevens. None supported El-Sayed, who, by the way, is not a nobody. He ran for governor against Gretchen Whitmer, two-term governor, a very popular one. So he's been on the scene before. And we're seeing this in other states, notably Maine, where the Democratic establishment tried to gin up a candidate to go against Plattner before Plattner imploded, and it was Mills, the governor. There's this weird battle going on in all these states where the Democratic establishment is sort of trying, and in some cases succeeding, in getting what they think are good candidates. Ohio, Alaska, Iowa are all candidates that Democrats basically agree are perfect for them in those states. But in other states, it hasn't gone the way they wanted it to go.
And so part of this conversation, it's not just about what's going on in Michigan. And Josh, you talked about the other states where some of these battles are playing out. Jayme, can you give us a sense of sort of the battle that is shaping up heading into the November midterm elections, and sort of the test that these progressive candidates that, they're building momentum, they're beating the establishment candidates. How will the midterms sort of serve as a test for the broader future of the Democratic Party?
I would love to hear what you guys think about this. I was listening to Fareed Zakaria on the weekend talk about what he thinks the big issue is in the Democratic Party right now. And he was saying essentially that it's not that the left needs to move further left on economic issues, but they need to move closer to the center on sort of cultural and social issues, on the woke agenda, but also on crime and on immigration. And, Fareed was saying that, while the progressive wing of the party has the heart and the momentum and, the internet behind them, they don't actually have the votes. And, obviously, I think that if you ask people in the progressive wing about this, they would say that in the last election, the Democrats ran a status quo Democrat and lost. And so they don't actually have their finger on the pulse of the electorate. But, what do you both make of that argument, that they don't actually have the votes to carry these states?
I think it depends on the state. And this is in some ways new and in some ways isn't. The Sayed-Stevens map looks almost exactly like the Bernie-Hillary map from 2016.
Yes.
Bernie Sanders won Michigan in that primary, and it's virtually the same, county by county. I'm exaggerating slightly, but it is, if you put, people struggle to differentiate. And so this has been going on for some time, and we are now, 2028 is underway, by the way, already, and we are starting to see it play out again. And of course, we're seeing that with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the representative from New York, who is probably the top flag bearer for the progressive movement right now, even higher than Bernie or at least on the same tier as Senator Sanders, as well as Senator Elizabeth Warren. And the question right now is AOC going to run in 2028? Would Senator El-Sayed run in 2028 if he wins this Senate race? Who will the progressives put up to run? I think they'll put up someone. And so the question, I think, is like where you're going to see this sort of battle play out with a crowded stage of moderate / establishment candidates / harder to place candidates, and at least one progressive. And you speak about, they maybe don't have the votes. They've got donors. Mm-hmm. They've got an ecosystem. There's a lot of like left-wing new media, progressive new media that progressive candidates can go on. When people hear this, we'll know the results from Wisconsin, where a progressive candidate is the front runner for the Democratic gubernatorial election. That's an important swing state, and the governor will have an important role to play in the 2028 election. Remember, Trump, of course, tried to interfere in the recounts and stuff in 2020. So we're going to see this play out, and we're going to see it play out at the national level. AOC on air this weekend distancing herself from what she called woke one.
Woke one crazy.
Uh-huh.
Woke one was crazy, she said.
My understanding is that that Francesca Hong has made clear her present stances to her electorate.
Yeah, she's moved away from a lot of that.
Right, she's moved away from it. And I have a local city councilman that has this saying, woke one was crazy.
So I think that is notable, that we are seeing some progressives sort of reject the binary definition, right? El-Sayed would reject it too. Dr. El-Sayed, I should say, would reject it too. And she's saying that was then, this is now. And moderates and Republicans are saying, well, I mean, I guess even if we say you're allowed to switch your positions, it doesn't necessarily mean you get to just kind of like walk away without any questions as to why. And so we don't really know where Representative Ocasio-Cortez will land on some of this stuff, but she is a major figure in the Democratic Party who I think basically everyone expects to either run against Chuck Schumer or run, if he retires, for that Senate seat, or run for president, or maybe both if the timelines work out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The other thing I think is worth pointing out is that watching the Democrats doing this in real time, it's not unusual for a political party to, especially a political party that's sort of out in the wilderness at this moment, try to find a way to rebrand itself.
Can I, Katie, how do you think, like, where do you think the Democrats' responsibility is here too, right? Like the campaigns that they have run, which I think the left would say have been uninspiring, had no big ideas, were just status quo, and didn't speak to the frustrations that Americans really have, this idea that the system is corrupt and ineffective and isn't working for them.
I think that if your main point of a campaign is that we're not Donald Trump, that is not enough to galvanize voters, and we've seen that. We've seen that very clearly. That was the message of 2024. Also, in terms of the way that the Democratic infighting, the inability of Joe Biden to recognize that it was time to go, to give another person, to give the party an opportunity to run a primary rather than, this campaign that was that did not end in success for the Democrats, as we have all seen. It's messy. It illustrates there's a lack of vision, there's a lack of leadership, and that control is being sort of, that the control and the decision-making process, it's a mess. It's a mess.
I just don't think we know what a Democratic campaign looks like because we haven't had a true one in 20 years. It was a coronation for Clinton. They had kind of won under Biden, of course, but that was an election about Trump, and 2024 was an aberration in many ways. There's a lot of Democrats who won statewide races, Governor Shapiro, for instance, with a playbook that works. And so I think that people might be premature in writing off, either party based on what happened in 2024. One thing that I think some Democrats now, they're looking at all this not infighting, but race internally between factions of the party, and they think that their own party is missing the forest for the trees, right? Trump started an unpopular war. Prices are still very high. His numbers are Nixon level bad. I mean, there is a lot to campaign on if you're a Democrat, regardless of whether you're a moderate or not. As we sit here today, Republicans have more money. They've got the presidency, they've got the Senate, they've got the House. That is all a big advantage for them. A lot of Republicans will privately tell you they don't really expect to hold the House. if only because of history. And we'll see where it goes. They are rallying, meanwhile, behind Vice President Vance as the heir apparent. That could change. Who knows? But some version of the current status quo will lead the party through the 2028 cycle, it seems. For Democrats, the downside for them is, of course, they don't really have a leader of the party. They can't really decide which faction has what weight. But they do have some money, even though the DNC is having a lot of financial problems. And they're going to have a tailwind because Trump has started an unpopular war and is presiding over an economy that people are unhappy with. And so that is the sort of position that both these parties are starting from. And then from there, we'll see. I mean, there still remains a structural advantage for Republicans in America under the current structures of the party. One, by the way, that will only sort of increase in the coming years, in part because they're going to continue redistricting for 2028 in the House. And the next census is probably going to move electoral votes southward into states that lean more Republican than those votes sit in right now. And so Republicans do have a leg up in that way that people shouldn't lose sight of.
You know, guys, we've been talking a lot about these ascendant left-wing politicians, El-Sayed, AOC. But I do, since I have you both here, I am so curious about some of these like potential 2028 contenders for the Democratic Party that are, you know, more centrist, that people seem to be getting excited about. One of them is Jon Ossoff, that I don't actually know very much about him, but since being here in Washington, his name keeps coming up. Obviously, there was that TMZ, I can't believe I'm saying this, the TMZ clip the other day when TMZ, which now has, I think, a Washington bureau.
They do.
Yeah, they do. They're doing politics now, cornered him and talked about how he has like BDE energy for those who might know what that means.
It does not stand for boycott and divest.
It does not. It does not. Just like that he has a lot of swagger, I think would be another way to say it, that he has a lot of swagger.
Come on, my brother. A lot of people have been saying you walk with confidence, you carry yourself through.
Only an Aussie
would
ask me that.
Right.
You doing okay?
I'm doing very good.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
Good to
sir.
see you, man.
Good to see you too, buddy.
Good to see you.
Have a good one. Catch you around. You too.
And so, you know, where is like an Ossoff, a Buttigieg, a Newsom? Like, you know, if we're going to sort of talk about potential presidential contenders here.
I don't want to be a bummer, but do y'all want to feel a little old right now? Because the Poly Market and Kalshi odds all have Newsom as the likeliest Democratic nominee in 2028. But then second place is basically AOC and Jon Ossoff, the senator from Georgia. AOC is 36 years old. Jon Ossoff, current U.S. senator, 39 years old. So just there is potential generational change coming to this Democratic Party, and we just don't know what that will look like. And we're already seeing it, right? In Michigan, of course, all the candidates were like an entire generation younger than Senator Peters, who's retiring. And so Ossoff's an interesting case. We talk about why Michigan was so important this cycle. Ossoff is the only Democratic senator up for re-election in a Trump state, period. And so Republicans had their eyes open on that race, but their primary kind of fell into a mess the way that Democrats have in other states. And Ossoff has just been such a prodigious fundraiser. And some polls show him up 9 points. There's one that had him up 13 points. And now it just seems very likely that he will hold that seat. And so that's why people are putting a lot of stock in him as a potential candidate. I went to one of his rallies to cover that race a few weeks ago. There was genuine enthusiasm behind him. And I think one question for him and for others is, do moderates think you're moderate and do progressives think you're progressive? Can you kind of appeal to both? Is there the eye of the beholder factor? Ossoff has a bit of that. I should note he has said that he's not running in 2028. Of course, people always say that, and then they maybe change their mind. But he is right now sort of running the moderate playbook. He touted endorsements from 2 Republican mayors. He touted an endorsement from a former Republican senator, Jeff Flake, who, of course, is not particularly Republican anymore, so take that with a grain of salt. But he's going in that lane. And the question, I think, more immediately for Jon Ossoff is, can he generate a political environment enough that the governor's race also goes Democratic? Because if you are a sitting senator running for president, one of the questions is, what happens if you win? Do we lose your seat? And if a Republican is governor of Georgia, that's the answer would be yes, probably lose a seat, at least in the interim. So Jon Ossoff is saying he's not running for president, but he's raising a ton of money. He's on pace for a large victory. Who knows? in a swing state. And I think the more immediate question is, can Democrats win that governor's race? And then we'll go from there. I think there are a number of gubernatorial races right now where Democrats think that they can gain either more narrow or actually flip the seats. And I think that is important right now. But yeah, 39 years old, I am not comfortable covering senators who are like my age. It's like it's making me feel like I haven't done much with my life. No, but anyway, So Ossoff right now, he's up. Interesting in Georgia, though, there were 2 Democratic senators. In 2021, Trump was kind of throwing a tantrum about the election. The runoff was January 5th. He did not really particularly encourage his voters to go out and vote. And Democrats won both Georgia Senate runoffs, flipping the Senate and giving Joe Biden the power to do stuff. And then a day later, January 6th happened. So it's like, it's wild. John Ossoff lost his election in November, but neither cracked 50%, and that went to a runoff. So it's so funny. And now we're coming back to it again, and Trump is facing a competitive election in Georgia again, going to campaign for Mike Collins, the candidate running against Ossoff, and intervening in a way, by the way, that defeated the Governor Kemp candidates in the primary in that race. In other words, the Trump people won the races there in the primaries, but is now distancing himself from the candidates. And so I wonder if history is repeating itself in Georgia, where the president is sort of more of a hindrance than a help to the Republicans running on the ticket there, but we'll see.
It's really interesting.
I'll never forget, I went to a Stop the Steal rally in November of 2020 after Trump had lost the general, but he was out there campaigning for the 2 Republican candidates. And the big sort of story of the night was, would he actually encourage people to go to the polls, or was he going to use this moment to complain about how the election was stolen from him? And it was a Stop the Steal rally. And then I'll never forget working very late into the night of January 5th because it was going to determine control of the U.S. Senate. And then the very next day being on the lawn of the U.S. Capitol when all of the Trump supporters were crashing into the building.
By the way, the president still believes 2020 was stolen. So let's not sleep on that. They have gone and pulled records from Fulton County in Georgia. We don't know what this election will look like in a few months. We don't know
what he'll do.
We don't know what he'll do. We don't know if they'll try to send National Guard to polling precincts in majority black districts or something like that. We just don't know. We don't know like what his allegations of fraud will manifest themselves as in terms of action, and therefore I think it's very difficult to make predictions on this election. The president believes the election system is corrupt. Of course, there is no public proof of that anyone can point to in any sort of systematic way. But he believes it. He believes it. His aides believe it. And therefore, I think it's reasonable to think that they feel on solid footing to try to do something about it. And I think we should therefore expect them to try to, let's say, increase election security is how they will probably frame it. We just don't know what that will look like. And therefore, I think people should be very clear-eyed about what the next few months are going to look like.
Yeah, and they've certainly laid a lot of groundwork to allow for that to happen.
And that is a very sobering point that you make there, Josh. And I think that on that really sobering note, I think that that's perhaps where we leave this conversation. And I suspect Canadians will want to hear more about that as we go forward. So an absolutely fascinating look at what's going on right now. Josh, thank you so much for your time, for taking time out of your very busy day. I think you have to go over to the White House still today. So like your day is just kind of starting for us.
2 blocks from here. It's right in the title.
There you go. You got it.
It's an easy commute.
Exactly.
Well, it was great.
Construction,
it was great to listen
more.
to today.
Yeah.
And Jayme, thank you so much for taking the time. Jayme, I'm coming home this weekend. I can't wait I hope I can cross paths with you and we can go have a cocktail before you head back to Toronto. But it's been great to have you for a couple of weeks, and hopefully you'll join us again in the future.
I would love to, Katie. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you guys today.
Yeah,
I've learned a lot. Thank you.
I should mention that all of us will be off next week, so we are not going to have a new episode of the podcast, but we will be bringing you Jayme's front burner episode on democratic socialism, which is a perfect deep dive after this episode.
As always, if you have something that you would like to ask or feedback about what you're hearing, send an email to WashingtonPod, all one word, at CBC.ca. That's WashingtonPod at CBC.ca, or leave a comment for us on Spotify.
And while I'm not a CBC employee, let me say, on behalf of my dear friend Katie, that if you like the podcast and like what you're hearing, spread the word, tell a friend, and follow it on your favorite podcast app so that you never miss an episode, whether it has me or anyone else.
Jayme, Josh, thank you so much, both of you, for your time today.
Guys, this was such a pleasure. Again, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you both. It was great to be here.